it's a real honor, of course, to be here tonight in front of you all for this occasion. I'm going to say a few words about Lucian Howe. And, Jerry had Lucian Howe's picture up there a moment ago. And forgive my glasses here occasionally, but Lucian Howe was born in 1848. When you think about it, here's a guy who could have enlisted in 1864. At 16, he could have enlisted. He could have fought in the last year of the Civil War. That sort of puts it into context, I think. When you think 1848, what does that mean? Think about this guy could have fought in the Civil War. Now, luckily, he did not enlist at age 16. Rather, he went to Harvard Medical School and then came to Buffalo. I'm not quite sure what brought him to Buffalo, but he practiced here for 50 years. Now, Lucian Howe was what I said James was going to become, in a way, today, because Lucian Howe was president of every organization he was a member of at some point in time. So in Buffalo, of course, he was a member of the New York State organization, and he became president of that. And at a certain point in time, he came up with this concept of a prize, a medal, if you will. And he felt that such a prize was going to promote ophthalmology and promote a healthy rivalry within ophthalmology, an academic rivalry, if you will, that would promote the advancement of the profession. I want to read a couple of quotes of his. This is very true. So he said in writing up about his prizes, and again, the New York State one was the first one, and the New York State Medical Society was initially developed in 1906. But he said, young physicians covet cash prizes. But he said gold medals are more appreciated by investigators ripe in years and experience as lasting evidence of distinguished professional service. And so, yes, I'm sure if I was giving this prize to James tonight, where are you, James? I'm using you all the time. If I was giving this, James would want $1,000 out of this prize.
He's not ripe enough.
He's definitely not ripe enough. But guys like Jack, guys like Jerry, know that these kind of things are not about the money. If it was a $50,000 award, if it was the Bressler Prize in New York, a $100,000 award, it's no more important than the honor of receiving it. It's about the honor. And that's what we bestow tonight. After 1906, in developing the award for the New York State Medical Society, he next became president of the AOS and endowed a medal there in 1919. Became president of the section of ophthalmology in the American Medical Association before we were a separate organization. He became president and he endowed that in 1924. And in his will, because he died in 1928, in his will, he remembered Buffalo and endowed a prize for Buffalo. And that prize was traditionally associated with the university, but also with the community of ophthalmologists. Because, again, for 50 years, he is the premier practicing ophthalmologist in Buffalo. When you look at the awardees and the active Howe medals are still the AOS, and I believe did Dan Jones just get it in New York when we were there? Did you just get that?
It was from Baltimore. The former chairman at Howe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So when you look at these, and you can look at AOS, or you can look at the UB, it is clearly a who's who of ophthalmology. The giants, the textbook writers, the people that are the demigods of ophthalmology have earned this award. It is an exclusive club, whether received from the AOS or whether received from the university here. And it's an exclusive club that I'm happy to be a part of awarding membership in. It's something that I think every career aspires to. Now there's the last thing I want to quote from Howe. I won't spend a lot of time talking about his book, Muscles of the Eye. But really that's what's near and dear to me. But he didn't endow any Strabismus Award, unfortunately. Yes, yes, there you go. But he felt that there are 3 reasons to get this. And reason 1 was to encourage the potential young investigator. None of the awards have ever been given for that reason. Number 2 was to recognize a career body of work. And I think that's what we're going to recognize tonight. The 3rd was to recognize a moment in time, if you will, where something so revolutionary was produced to warrant that prize on its own. I would say our 2 recipients tonight fulfill 2 of those criteria. Tough luck on the young guys. Can't help you there. But Dr. Coleman, as we know, who essentially makes ultrasound a possibility. Not a possibility, that's wrong, I apologize. Makes ultrasound a useful, widespread tool that, again, almost overnight, the value of this is clear. That's a unique contribution, and that is a reason to receive this prize. Our tonight's recipient is really receiving it for a body of work. And I'm not going to go into your body of work because I know that's what Deepa is going to do. And I'm going to turn this over to Deepa because it was Deepa who nominated Dr. Bovino for this award. And I'm sure they have a connection, despite the fact that he wrote muscles and not retina. Nonetheless, Deepa has a connection to Dr. Bovino professionally that I don't share. And so I thought it was very appropriate that an up-and-coming retina surgeon should do the introduction for a retinal surgeon of such fame and notoriety as Dr. Bovino. So Dr. Yoganathan.
Thanks, Dr. Reynolds. So, in fact, you're very accurate. Dr. Bovino and I ran into each other at the ASRS meeting in Toronto last year with Gareth Lima, actually. So it was this serendipitous meeting that led to this event tonight, and I'm really excited about it. So I thought about how to introduce you. And I thought that maybe I should introduce what you mean to me personally and what you mean to the retina organization, the retina specialists in general, not just in the United States, but across the world.
You may need the microphone.
Ah, really? Okay. So who is Jerald Bovino? So before I start, I just want to share how I met Dr. Bovino. I probably met him on the dance floor at an ASRS meeting, and it was either in 2007 or 2008, and maybe in Palm Springs. Were you at the Palm Springs meeting? Yeah, so that was probably when I met you. And I was a first-year retina fellow at the time, and I was very green, and I didn't know a lot of retina people. And you know, the ASRS meetings are very social and very, they're 5 days long. They're very intense, but they're also very social, and it's very easy to meet people. And here's Dr. Bovino, who I run into on the dance floor, and we just start chatting, and we probably chatted for an hour that night. And I learned a lot about retina through him, and I learned a lot about him. So who is Jerry Bovino? Dr. Bovino created the ASRS. So that very meeting that I met him, it all started from him. So in 1982, Jerald Bovino and his colleagues Roy Levitt and Alan Verne started the idea of the they started the idea of the Vitreous Society, which is what it was called then. And the reason why they started the Vitreous Society when there was already a Macula Society and a Retina Society is because the Macula Society and the Retina Society were very exclusive clubs, and they did not allow community ophthalmologists who did not have a perfect CV to join. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. And as you can see from his talk today at the conference, that is basically denying all the wonderful ideas and research opportunities that community guys offer to the society. And as he discussed today, macular holes, the surgery for macular holes was created and basically mastered by community guys. And if they weren't given the opportunity to share their work, then we would not have, or the surgery for macular holes would have been delayed. So the Vitreous Society was created and then later termed the American Society of Retina Specialists. So the American Society of Retina Specialists is now the most widely attended retina meeting in the world. So there's 76 annual retina meetings that occur in the United States, which is a crazy number, but that is a combination of industry, non-industry, community, and academic meetings. There are over 2,400 members of the American Society of Retina Specialists, and 400 of them are from 55 countries. So this is the most important retina organization in the world, and Dr. Bovino started it. Dr. Bovino also wrote the first textbook on macular surgery. And the reason why I know this is because a week after I meet him on the dance floor, in the mail, I get this book. That it has a lovely personalized message. Dear Deepa, good luck on your career. It was such a pleasure to chat with you and get to know you. And I'm this like junior fellow, and what an amazing honor it was to get his book. And it's a really good book, actually. And so he wrote this book in 1994. Jerry Bovino now writes an article in the Retina Times I think we release it every quarter, the Retina Times. He calls it Jerry's Wisdom. And I will read an excerpt from his words of wisdom at the end of this little presentation. What Dr. Bovino does with his time nowadays is the Jerry Bovino Show. And in preparation for tonight, I watched a lot of video of the Jerry Bovino Show. And I learned a lot about relationships, I learned a lot about life, and I learned why this show is the most popular show in Aspen, Colorado. And he shares his show with his family and with a lot of very interesting guests that we talked about at lunch today. So that's what he's been doing for the last 12 years. So what did I know about Jerry Bovino before I met him before I got to know him this year? I knew that he was a fun, cool, happy, gregarious, and adventurous guy. So what I did not know about Jerry Bovino is the following. That he went to University of Buffalo. I knew him for all these years, and I had no idea that he had any connection to Buffalo all this time. So he graduated in 1971 from the University of Buffalo medical school. He graduated #1 in his class. Obviously, he was AOA prior to that. He received 2 awards, the Mosby Award and the Lang Award. He received multiple scholarships, the James Cummings Scholarship, the Walter Goodale Scholarship, the R.M. Elliott Scholarship. Then he went on to St. Luke's to do ophthalmology. He graduated in 1977, and then he went to do his vitreoretinal fellowship at the University of Iowa. During that time, he was also the chief ophthalmic surgeon at Mercy Hospital in Abak, Nigeria. This was in 1977. And this was very interesting today because our retina fellow, who is with us for 3 months through the International Council of Ophthalmology, is also from Nigeria. He also was a lieutenant commander for the U.S. Public Health Service between 72 and 74. So how much more interesting can this guy get? He apparently has 4 Hollywood films, which I could not find any footage of, but I would really like to. But I did find him on IMDb. This I found really interesting. So he has 2 registered patents. One was in 2005 for the ribbed design, ribbed cover design, that we are all familiar with because of the iPad ribbed cover. So he actually sued Apple and Target in 2012 for this ribbed design, which I found. If you Google Jerry Bovino, this is what you'll find. And this is pictures from his patent. And on the side, he was clinical professor of ophthalmology at the Medical College of Ohio. He was director of research. He also taught at St. Vincent's. And in terms of research and inventions and demonstrations, he invented the use of laser to drain subretinal fluid during scleral buckling. He first described radial retinotomy in the macula, and the residents know this lecture that I gave about relaxing incisions in the periphery for retinal detachment. So he did that, not in the periphery, but in the macula. And he was the first and only American to receive the Zivonovich Award, which is the highest prize in the European Vitreoretinal Society. And all this from the guy who came from UB Medical School, living on Groveland Street off of Hurdle in 1968. So this is a picture that he shared of his roommates in his second year of medical school. So I'd like to end with a quote from the Retina Times, this edition, which is summer 2014. And his article is entitled, "I Buy Cheap Alarm Clocks." If they made a high-quality alarm clock that was uncomplicated, I would buy it, regardless of price. But I definitely don't want any bells and whistles. I just need the damn thing to wake me up. Whenever I discover a $5 alarm clock, I buy half a dozen. These Spartan alarm clocks will not play DVD, they will not sync with my iPod, they will not allow themselves to be programmed with a lullaby my mother sang to me as a baby, and they will not sound like a flywheel screaming screaming as an Atlantic salmon runs off 100 yards of line. But what they will do is predictably ring the alarm at the time that I want. The older I become, the more I crave simple things. I joke with my friends that I should write a book about food. I would call it food without adjectives. I don't want it drizzled, I don't want it braised, I don't want it infused, and I certainly don't want it truffled. I want simple food. I've probably operated on more than 1,000 diabetic tractional detachments during my career. In the years before laser had transitioned into general use, traction detachments were more common than handguns at a Tea Party convention or liberals on Park Avenue. I dissected diabetic membranes in the 1970s with simple vertical cutting and horizontal cutting manual scissors. My cuts were precise and controlled. However, after a few years of practice, an instrument salesman at the academy meeting showed me motorized scissors. I was enamored with the little piece of equipment, and I quickly incorporated it into my surgical routine. It reduced my OR time, and I could zip through membranes like the proverbial warm knife through frozen butter. I became so confident in my motorized intraocular scissors that I thought the device was the next best thing since sliced bread, until it wasn't. One rainy morning, while engaging in epiretinal membrane, the motorized scissors took on a mind of their own. The scene was like in the sci-fi movies when an alien makes a hole in the back of the guy's neck and takes over his brain. The motorized scissors, without any warning, turned into a bull in a china shop. I removed them from the eye and never touched them again. When technology becomes master, disaster comes faster. Remember this every time you enter the operating room. It will serve you and your patients well. So this is just one example of the wisdom that Dr. Bovino teaches us influential retina people to this day. And I have the great honor of introducing you, and I'm very flattered that I was asked to do so. So Dr. Bovino, please come up.
Thank you, Dina. Thank you very much. This is the greatest day of my life right now. And there are certain inflection points in a man's life that define him as a person. For me, I can count them on a couple of fingers. The day that I was accepted to medical school here in Buffalo, the day I met my wife, the day my children were born, and the day my grandchildren were born, and today. So it's a pretty limited, it's a pretty limited selection of days. But today is the best day, and the reason it means more to me than I can think of anybody in the world is that I wish my mother were here today. My mother died a few years ago. My mother taught me an old proverb. She said, if you want your dreams to come true, don't sleep. And if she were here today, she would be very proud of me because she knows that I had a lot of help from people along the way to get where I am. So Harry Truman said that there's no limit to what you can accomplish as long as you don't care who gets the credit. And the credit for this award belongs to many educators, many, who helped me here in Buffalo along the way. Because I came here and I was nobody, just a kid from Queens who dreamed about becoming a doctor. And people gave selflessly of their time to me. It's really an amazing thing. So there's a lot of people that need to be thanked. First of all, I want to thank all of you. You came tonight, which is half the rule of success is to show up, so I appreciate that. Second of all, it's hard to support an ophthalmology department as well as you support Dr. Reynolds and his residents and fellows, and you guys do a great job. To run an academic ophthalmology department requires real community support. And I know that all of the people at the Ross Eye Institute appreciate what you've done for them, so you deserve a lot of credit. I want to thank Dean Kane. He's not here. He's in Europe right now. I want to thank Jim Reynolds. Jim is an amazing person, and we've gotten to know each other over the past few days. I could not have done what Jim Reynolds did here. I don't think most of us could have. Not only is he smart, but he is to organize and do this. And Kathleen knows what he did and how hard he had to work to do it, so I'm sure she's very proud of him. I want to thank Jack Coleman, who's I mentioned earlier. For those of you who weren't here, I've known Jack for many years. Jack is a remnant of a gentlemanly ophthalmologist who was not only respected for his intellect, but for his good values. And there's not one person in the world who doesn't admire Jack Coleman. And I'm sure Janie knows that. I want to thank Deepa and Gareth and Dr. Umberto, because you're my retina colleagues, and after a while, ophthalmology becomes so specialized we barely know what the other ones are doing. I want to thank Elaine Taylor. She's not here right now, but she's Dr. Reynolds' secretary, extremely well organized. I wish she were here so I could thank her in person. Jennifer Seth Simony, where are you, Jennifer? Raise your hand. And Christine, where's Christine? Okay, they're from the development department here in Buffalo. They've been very cordial to me. They're playing me like a Stradivarius right now. And if any of you want to help the department, they're the ones to talk to. And mostly every doctor in Buffalo who gave of their time to help me. I want to thank my mom and dad, Joe and Louise. Louise isn't here anymore. Joe is going to be 93 on Saturday, and I'm flying down to see him in Florida. And my sister Janice, and they always believed in me. And my children, Rachel and David. Rachel, I'd like you to come up for a second. David's an attorney, and he's got to be in court tomorrow on an important case, otherwise he would have been here. And then most importantly, Esther, come up. I can tell you with all humility that Esther is the brains of the operation. I always tell people I just work here. Thanks, guys. So Lucien Howe was a great man. Lucien Howe was an amazing man. The one thing that Dr. Reynolds didn't tell you, that Howe and his wife Elizabeth resided in Buffalo at 522 Delaware Avenue in an impressive mansion. And each morning his ritual was to line up the 7 to 9 servants, including the gardener, the stableman, 2 chambermaids, a waitress, kitchen help, and stenographers, for inspection of nails, apron, and shoes. Clearly, this was before Obamacare. The one thing that I'd like to just touch on, and this is not intended in a pejorative sense because it's timely again, Lucien Howe was one of the foremost proponents in America of eugenics. Doctors in the late 1800s and early 1900s were fascinated about the idea of genetics and about the concept of improving the human race through better breeding. This was common. Teddy Roosevelt was a big proponent of this. And a friend of mine who was actually on one of the Nobel Prize winning genetics teams sent me this article this year, and that's why I want to mention it. And if you look over here, there's a commercial company called 23andMe. It analyzes our DNA, and the yellow header says, "I prefer a child with designer babies," okay? And they are arranging now for people to choose the traits they want in their babies through genetic choices. It's an incredibly interesting but frightening concept. And Lucien Howe never lived long enough to see the net effect. His interest, in fairness to Dr. Howe, was in preventing congenital blindness. Okay, he was very concerned about the effect on the families and the cost to society of congenital blindness. But now we're getting back to it again, where people are trying to pick the traits they want in their babies. It's an interesting concept. So, okay, I'm going to give you a choice. Who wants a boring lecture? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Who wants a fun lecture? Okay, we're going to do a fun lecture. So, I call this lecture The Sliding Doors of Buffalo. And I hope we're going to enjoy it. We talked a little bit about my television show. And you notice the eye on aspen. It's an aspen leaf inside an eye.
And now, here's Jerry.
Jerald Bovino, welcome back to Life's Drop Shots. We have a guest today that requires no introduction. Chris Everett. Chris, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you. What's the Chrissy thing, by the way? Do you like Chris or Chrissy?
Chrissy is more familiar. Chrissy is more personable, younger.
We all remember you from when you were 14 and you were a little Chrissy Everett, remember? So
No.
we
I don't
remember.
remember that.
So how did you get to Aspen? Give us a little bit about your background, Chris.
Oh, how did I get to Aspen?
Anyway, when people ask me, how did you get to do a TV show? It's the same skills we learned as physicians in taking an interview. Because when I was at the VA almost 48 years ago,
I never skied, I've never been to a ski resort.
you don't stop on the first question. You say, do you drink? No, I don't drink. Well, do you drink socially? I drink socially. Well, how much is social? Well, 3 martinis at dinner and 3 at lunch. You must keep asking questions. It's not easy to be an interviewer unless you want to get the information. Okay? So you all can be, everyone here learned how to be a TV interviewer. It's the same as taking a history from a patient. You're just getting a story. So,
and knew that I was a total beginner, and he said, you know what, Martinez?
Confucius said, choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. That's for all of us. I know when Jack Coleman goes to work, he loves what he does. It's sometimes when you make a patient see again, I used to be amazed that they pay you for that. I mean, it feels so good. So, I cry at underdog movies, okay? And all underdog movies have a theme. We're going to talk about that, but I want you to watch this first one.
6 years you've been sticking it to me. I want an outcome. You want to know? Okay, I'm going to tell you. Because you had the talent to become a good fighter. And instead of that, you became a leg worker. Some cheap, second-rate loan shark. To living? It's a waste of life.
Any screenwriter in Hollywood, I've produced 4 films, any screenwriter knows that an underdog movie has certain components. First of all, the protagonist has to want to conquer something. And he has to have an adversary against him conquering something. In this case, Rocky wanted to last 15 rounds. It doesn't have to, he didn't want to win. And Apollo Creed was going to stop him, and Burgess Meredith was his mentor. Every underdog movie has a mentor, just like we had. That's why I cry at underdog movies, because it's me. I'm the underdog, and all these people helped me to reach my goal to become a doctor. So,
6 individuals
same thing with Hoosiers.
made the choice to work, choice to sacrifice, put themselves on the line, represent you, this high school. This is your team.
Hoosiers. They needed a second chance to finish first.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Chariots of Fire. Sam Musabini, the sprint coach, telling Mr. Abraham, who had to conquer not just his running ability, but the anti-Semitism that was prominent at the time. Can you hear me? Mr. Miyagi. We all remember Mr. Miyagi, right? Remember, Daniel's goal wasn't really to become a karate champion, it was to get the girl. Sometimes your goal is as simple as to get the girl. So this talk today is called Sliding Doors. There was a movie with Gwyneth Paltrow that my wife and I loved. And basically the premise of the movie was that everybody has sliding doors in your life. You can go through that door and something will happen to you. You can go through that door, something different will happen. So each of us has made choices or had choices made for us out of our control that got us to where we are today. In this movie, you see she's trying to make the train. She doesn't make the train as one sliding door, and then she comes back and makes the train as the second sliding door. You notice it's just a little girl that gets in her way, that delays her the first time around, and she misses the train. And the next sliding door, she makes the train when she gets home. Her husband's in bed with her best friend, and her life is ruined. And so all of our sliding doors are happening in our lives all the time. And don't think about my sliding doors, but think about the sliding doors in your life, because that's what this is really about. So I called this the sliding doors of Buffalo. And I'm going to tell you the story, my story in Buffalo, because it's really a universal story. It's not about me, but it's about each of you and your lives. So it starts in World War I, okay? It's 100 years ago.
The year is 1914. The European subcontinent is embroiled in bloody trench warfare. Soldiers on all sides are victims to artillery fire, mustard gas, and new automatic rifles. Their biggest enemy, however, is infection. Of those wounded in battle, few will survive even their minor injuries. Field hospitals populate the front lines, with young doctors and nurses working day and night to stem the stealthy killer. Their main defense is antiseptic, which proves just as lethal to the patients as no treatment at all. One frustrated young doctor called Alexander Fleming is unwilling to accept the inefficacy of current medicine to rescue the wounded in battle. He would later dedicate his life to understanding and fighting infections, going on to pioneer one of the most influential medical discoveries of the 20th century, a discovery which Time magazine claims has altered the course of history.
Okay, so Alexander Fleming, we all know the story about how he had the contaminated staph plate, and there was penicillin mold on it, and he identified the fact that it was inhibiting the growth of the staph, and had he not, pursued that, somebody else would have thrown out the contaminated plates. So the next thing is Louise and Joe. Louise and Joe, my mom and dad, they met in a candy store in Brooklyn, and Joe said that he had never met anyone like Louise. She was different from all the other girls. And keep that in mind, because we're going to get back to that a little later. And Joe fought in the 5th American Army coming through North Africa.
General Mark Clark, headed for Salerno, 28 air miles south of Naples. The furthest point which could be protected by an umbrella of fighter planes from our bases in Sicily.
So he swept through North Africa into Italy, on into France and Germany, and he was a gunner on a 90mm gun. He had not seen this gun in 70 years, and a few weeks ago I found a clip of the 90mm gun that he was the gunner on, and I showed it to him, and so tears welled up in his eyes, thinking about the planes that they shot down, the people that died, and it was just, I could just see that a lot of emotion was tied up in that for a very specific reason, because World War II and the Great Depression were as important to our parents' generation as the Vietnam War was to my generation, and maybe as 9/11 will be to some of the younger people. They're defining moments in history.
So the men got to know their jobs so thoroughly that handling the guns became second nature to them. It was like walking or talking. It seemed they had done it always. They learned speed in setting up, speed in getting the word through, speed in firing.
That was Joe's job. He shoved the shell into the breech block and then pulled the firing.
Glass. These glass balls. And
this is called cupping.
You actually put the flame in there, and that actually starts to create a suction. Or create a vacuum, which will create a suction on the patient there. So you can see it actually pulls that up. And we leave that on there for a few moments, and sometimes we can also take it and move it around. See how it brings the blood up, like so. Okay.
Towards the end of the war, Joe was doing a prisoner exchange on the German-French border, and he got strep pneumonia. Wound up in a small hospital in France, a civilian hospital, and he had 106 fever, and he was blue, and they were doing cupping. And just by serendipity, there was an American doctor, a major from the Army, who went skiing for an R&R for a weekend, and he heard about some American GI who wound up in the hospital. And he went over and he looked at what they were doing. They still do this in places in the world, by the way. And he got a battle telephone, and he called headquarters and said, they're killing this guy. What can we do? And they said, well, we just have this new drug. We only have a few thousand units, but it's penicillin. So now we have the connection to Alexander Fleming. And there was no such thing as antibiotic resistance, okay, because there were no antibiotics. And if you remember in the scene in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid where Robert Redford and Paul Newman are being tracked by the Indian tracker who can track them over the water and the rocks, and they couldn't believe it. And they said, who are those guys? How do they do that? That's what these streps said, because within 24 hours my father was afebrile and on a train back to a regular hospital.
You get on my nerves. Who are those guys?
So this movie changed my life. It was made in 1955. I saw it in 1967 or 68. I was only 10 years old. Frank Sinatra and Robert Mitchum, Not as a Stranger. If you've never seen it, it's a great movie. And in the movie, Frank Sinatra is a playboy doctor, and Robert Mitchum is a serious doctor, and Robert Mitchum wants to be a good doctor. Frank Sinatra is more of a playboy.
Gentlemen, this is a corpse.
Yeah, Frank Sinatra and Robert Mitchum.
There is a tradition among medical students that dealing with death humorously makes things easier. It doesn't. There may be a successful joke about death in the abstract, but I have never heard it. About death in the particular, believe me, there is nothing funny at all. I have been a pathologist for over 25 years. I haven't been able to get a single laugh out of it yet. To some of you, this will be unpleasant. For a few, perhaps impossible. Now fix firmly in your heads that 7 hours ago, this was a living soul, housed in an edifice constructed by a supremely capable architect. You are about to violate it. And when you do, you will help yourselves immeasurably as physicians and healers if you do so tenderly and with love. Our purpose here today is to determine the cause of death. We will follow the method of Rokitansky, which is to remove the visceral organs intact. First, we will make a cruciate incision from the suprasternal notch to the pubis, and then transversely as well. Thus.
In the movie, Frank Sinatra is out partying and drinking, going out with girls when he should have been at a lecture, and he misses the lecture on malignant melanoma, and somebody dies because he improperly excises it. And because of that, I hold a record that I think is probably capable of getting me in the Guinness Book of World Records. For 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school, I never missed one class. I did not miss one class, not even art, not gym, because I was afraid that it would be like Frank Sinatra, and I didn't want it. And the prototypes for us of doctors back in the 1960s were Dr. Kildare, if you remember that.
Is there anything we can do for you, Miss Cartwright? Contact your regular physician?
I'm fresh out of regular physicians. I was trying to discharge old nuts and bolts over here, but he doesn't give up so easily. He and his great white apes had to chase me down the hall.
I thought...
I know what you thought. You thought I was taking the dive. Psychiatric deep six. All I wanted to do was find a private place to throw up. Well, thanks for the jab in the arm. I'll be moving along.
I should lie down on that bed a little longer, Miss Cartwright. At least until the sedative wears off. We wouldn't want you falling asleep at the wheel of your car.
Be the best way out of this, friend.
I don't say that. You're too pretty. It'd be a terrible waste.
Look at his bedside manner.
So we had the sort of obsequious Dr. Kildare, and then you had Marcus Welby. Now we get to Stephen Fagan, a very important person in the sliding doors of Buffalo. Stephen Fagan was a classmate of mine in high school, and you see he had a lot of confidence in me because he said the only course you'll pass at Queens is advanced poker playing. That was his total confidence in me. And Stephen Fagan, we all went to city schools. Most of us were of very modest financial means and had no ability to go to what I call the sleepaway college. But Stephen Fagan went to school in Buffalo, okay? And because his family had a little more money and he could go to a sleepaway college. So I took the bus to college at Queens College. And then at the end of college, I got called for an interview to Buffalo. And I had a trimmed haircut, clean shave, warm smile, confidence, formal dress, firm handshake. I had practiced it all, even the correct body posture. And your 2014 Howe Medal recipient here, and I want you to keep this in your mind, circa 1966. I was a fairly clean-cut young guy. I mean, I looked okay for the time.
Airports around
a big
New York
snowstorm hit in New York.
Today as both incoming and outgoing flights are cancelled. A second belt of snow this winter fell overnight, leaving...
And when the snow came...
The reality of first and goal.
We'll talk about this in a minute.
That one registered 3.8.
When the snow came, we were at LaGuardia Airport, and they canceled our flight. My flight to Buffalo, where I was going to be a doctor. And in the middle of chaos, there was a gate agent who said, you know, they've closed the airport here, but I think there's a flight from JFK going to Buffalo. And she took time out in the middle of chaos to call JFK and get us a reservation. And my father drove down the Van Wyck Expressway, and I made that flight. And that's when I came for my interview. And I'm showing you this picture of Refrigerator Perry, who was a lineman, a famous lineman for the Chicago Bears. He weighed 320 pounds, and they used him sometimes on goal lines to try to get in. And he actually scored some touchdowns in the Super Bowl. But Stephen Fagan, who looked okay in the previous picture, had told me about something called bocce pizza. And he had gained at least 100 pounds, okay? So this was Refrigerator Perry, but when Stephen Fagan came back from college, they called him the Oven because he had gotten tremendous, okay? So now I go to Buffalo because it's the only sleepaway college that I know, and Stephen Fagan invites me to stay with him. He stayed with 4 guys in a little apartment off of Hurdle. And when I got there, the dishes were covering the sink. I mean, there was every kind of bacteria in there. They hadn't been washed in 6 months. And I said, huh, that's sleepaway college. I didn't know what it was like. And then, in the morning before my interview, I said, do you have anything for breakfast? Maybe some cereal or something like that. He said, I think this bocce pizza in the refrigerator. It was cold pizza that I had.
Hi, I'm James Norton, and this is breakfast. I've taken 5 very different styles of pizza. They're all pepperoni pizzas, but we've got a garlic bread pizza, a deep dish pizza, thin crust, Domino's artisan. I really mixed it up just to see which it...
Turn on.
Let me just stop that for a second. So I started, here I want to be the doctor like Robert Mitchum that was the good doctor. And I dreamed about this all my life. And I started medical school in September of 1967. Do you remember what 1967 was called? The Summer of Love. The world was changing. The Vietnam War was on. The drug culture was starting. And this is what I had to deal with as I started medical school. I want to show you this. Let's see. Hold on a second.
Tune in. Drop out.
The Sgt. Pepper album at my first party in medical school. Vietnam War protests were starting. How many of you remember the Vietnam War protests?
The Vietnam War was a tumultuous time for American citizens. Young men died overseas in foreign, unfavorable territory.
There were people, if you remember, burning draft cards. And we had a deferment in medical school. We weren't forced to go in and skip our education, but burning draft cards was a big activity.
We must say no! Where are we gonna go? Hell no! We won't go! 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 Hell no! We won't go!
And then everything unwound in our society. Martin Luther King was assassinated in my freshman year.
1968, Memphis, Tennessee, 6:15 p.m. U.S. civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King is rushed to hospital after being shot. He's badly wounded. At the time, King is a towering figure, known throughout the world for his inspired direction of the U.S. civil rights movement. But in his high-profile fight to win more rights for America's black community, especially in the Deep South, King has also earned the undying hatred of a cabal of violent white extremists who despise him and all he stands for.
Johnson declared he will not run. This was a big surprise. My roommate in medical school came to me and said he was so distracted by the war that he decided not to run for another term. It
With
was shocking.
America's sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office.
Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated 30 seconds after this speech.
The divisions, the violence, the disenchantment with our society, the divisions, whether it's between blacks and whites, between the poor and the more affluent, or between age groups, or in the war in Vietnam, that we can start to work together. We are a great country, and a selfish country, compassionate country. And I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of the next few months.
He turned around, he walked out, and Sirhan shot him.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Thank you very much.
4 persons, including 2 women, were shot and killed on Kent State University's campus today during renewed demonstrations involving hundreds of students. The university was ordered closed as disorders continued for more than 2 hours. 6 other persons were reported shot in addition to those killed. The 4 persons were killed during a clash between students and members of the Ohio National Guard outside Taylor Hall near the University Commons.
Kent State, we all know Kent State. And now I want to show you the transformation. This is your 2014 Howe Medal recipient circa 1969. And when I showed it to my wife, she said, "I think you look better here." Notice the little beads also. That's definitely de rigueur for the era. So, and we have a Buffalo coincidence to finish it off. When I was a freshman medical student, I dated a girl who was roommates with Fern Malice. The development people should write down that name. She's the most famous person in fashion in America. She was a Mademoiselle editor, but she ran the Council of Fashion Designers and all the runway shows, and she's really a big deal, and she's successful. So Fern Malice, make sure someone gets to her. And coming back from a visit to Fern Malice one night, I walked downstairs and saw the name of a girl I had met in Greece on the doorway on 70th Street. And I called up, and it was the same girl that I knew in Greece. And when I went up, her roommate was Esther Preuss. And that is how I met my wife. So to put this all together for you, because this does have an ending. My sliding doors, mine aren't important, but I want you to think about yours. If World War I hadn't broke out 100 years ago, if Alexander Fleming hadn't developed an interest in infection during the war, if Fleming had discarded the contaminated Petri dishes instead of discovering penicillin, if Louise and Joe hadn't met in a candy store in Brooklyn, if an Army officer during the war hadn't decided to go skiing in the Alps, if the Army major hadn't heard a rumor about an American GI deathly ill in a French hospital, if penicillin had not just become available for limited use by the Army, if I hadn't seen the movie Not as a Stranger, if Stephen Fagan had gone to a different college other than Buffalo, if the airline agent hadn't helped us to get from New York City to Buffalo in a snowstorm, if SUNY Buffalo School of Medicine had not accepted me, I would never have met Fern Malice, who lived in a building with Esther Preuss, and my life would have been non-existent or dramatically different. So with that, I want to thank you all. And I want to take a second to read one of my columns. It'll just take a minute, but I think it's an important way to finish this talk. So hold on one second. This was written in Retina Times about 5 years ago. It's called Deshawn, and I think it's the way we want to finish tonight. His mother was crying softly when I walked into the emergency room. It was actually more of a low-pitched sob, with short gasps and erratic breaths between the tears that flowed like lava from a volcano down her face. She blurted out, "Doc, he can't see nothing. He's going to be blind." Deshawn's entire head was wrapped in gauze, a reminder of the look of Civil War victims in the 1860s. As I unwrapped the bandages, Deshawn's 3 brothers inched closer to the examining stool. Deshawn, a 17-year-old high school senior, was doing nothing more exciting than sitting by his apartment window when a random drive-by shotgun blast precipitated his ER visit. As the last layer of bloody gauze popped off, his face looked like someone had stuck a sharp barbecue fork in 20 times. The CT scan showed 3 or 4 intraocular pellets in each eye, and 2 or 3 that had penetrated the sclera and were sitting behind the globes. He had holes in his cornea, bilateral traumatic damage to his lenses, and dense vitreous hemorrhages in each eye. Ocular ultrasound showed the pellets and disruption of his retinas. His visual acuity, with plenty of encouragement, was bare light perception with no projection. Is he going to be okay, Doc? Can you make him see again? Fresh out of my fellowship, I placed my hand on Deshawn's mother and her brother's shoulder, and I spoke tentatively but reassuringly. Deshawn's had a bad injury, but I will give him my best care. We will give him everything we can. By the time I called in the vitreoretinal surgery nurses and techs, it was 11 o'clock on a Friday night. I operated on both eyes, repairing the corneal wounds, removing the crystalline lens, and wading through hemorrhagic vitreous that was, to mix my metaphors, tougher than trigonometry. The retina in each eye looked like baby Swiss cheese. After I surrounded the traumatic tears with enough endo laser to weld the steel beam, I did my gas fluid exchanges and finished the surgery at 5:30 in the morning. Everyone in the OR remained somber throughout the case. We were all pretty sure that Deshawn would be stone blind. The next morning when I examined Deshawn, he had great gas bubbles and attached retinas. He could see my hand movement through the SF6. The short part of this story is that miraculously, Deshawn, with the help of some old 1970s old-fashioned cataract glasses, saw 2200 and 2100. I saw Deshawn in the office for follow-up for more than 20 years. His entire family would come on the visits and they would thank me each time like it was the first time. I've never experienced more gratitude from any patient. The neighborhood around the hospital was pretty sketchy back in the 1970s. In fact, it would not be much of an exaggeration to say that the German shepherds would only venture out in pairs. However, Deshawn and his friends who hung out on Cherry Street always greeted me when I showed up, and they escorted me into the hospital on cold winter evenings, with Deshawn proudly telling everyone, "He's my doctor. We got you covered, Doc. Nothing to worry about in our neighborhood." Deshawn had no health insurance and his family had no money. I never got paid a penny for that surgery. But more than 30 years later, I remember how I helped that man as vividly as if it were yesterday. Finally, when you're an old retired guy like me, I promise that your fondest career memories will not be tied to reimbursement, but to the thankful patients that you helped to dramatically see again. Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. It really means a lot to me. Believe me, it does. Thank you. Thank you.
You have to stand in and we have to actually present the medal.
Oh, the medal.
Tom and Jack, you know, I want to say that was an impressive talk, but what I really want to say is that there were only 30 seconds of it that were great. And that 30 seconds were your tears. It shows the kind of man you are, and it shows the kind of compassion you brought to your life. And I can't imagine a better testimonial to your character than those tears. I was very pleased to see them. It was was a moving moment, and congratulations to a life well lived. This is a particularly exciting moment, I think, to have a former Howe medalist present the Howe medal to a new recipient. Jack, would you do the honors?
I'm delighted. I thought the whole talk was pretty special, frankly, and probably the best talk I've ever heard. And your talk today was marvelous. Terry, you've done a lot in your lifetime, and your ability to relate to people and what made us all want to go into medicine never was more evident than today. Congratulations, and thank you so much for letting us be part of this. This is a very special medal. As you noted, there were only a few of them, and I'm going to let, where's your wife?
Yes,
Esther. Would you be kind enough to pin this on? I happen to know that Harvey Linkoff, who got this a few years ago, dropped his.
Must have been Ingrid's fault.
So I would prefer not to be blamed for that. Esther, thank you for keeping him such a wonderful man and making us all proud of him. And Buffalo.
Yep.
She's gentle.
You're going to need some penicillin after this.
Jerry, congratulations for a wonderful evening.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for a wonderful evening.